So we're going to go ahead and start by labeling our notes with covalent bonds 2 because that is the lesson that we're on. And we are going to name binary covalent compounds. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about what is it we're even talking about here. What does binary mean? If we have binary system, we might have ones and zeros, like binary code in computer science. So binary means two elements, or having two things, having two elements. Right. So it's important to remember that we're only naming things with two elements. There's a lot of elements out there that have way more than two. We're just starting with the two here. So the rules for naming. The first rule, number 1, binary molecular compounds end in "ide". So binary molecular, because we know covalent compounds are molecules. Molecular compounds end in "ide". Now that was the same as ionic compounds. They had "ide" on the end as well. So a lot of them. So let's look at the second rule. The second rule is the first element keeps its name, but gets a prefix if it has a subscript. So the first element keeps its name, but gets a prefix if it has a subscript. So let's digest that a little bit. If it doesn't have a subscript, how many atoms are in that compound? Yeah. Okay, so if it doesn't have a subscript, how many atoms are in that compound for that element? Well, let's look at an example because we're not getting any answers. So if I have, let's just use one that we know very well. There's a subscript on the first element, but the second element has no subscript. So if there's no subscript there, how many atoms are in that compound? Show me on your fingers. You don't want to say it all. Just one, right? So let's go ahead and make a note of that because some of us were not answering on that one. Alright. So the name is going to tell us something about the compound, about the composition of the compound. We're going to have to go from the name back to the formula as well, and we'll do that here in a second. The last rule is the second element gets the "ide" suffix and always gets a prefix. So second element gets the "ide" suffix and always gets a prefix. So we're talking about these prefixes. What kind of prefixes do you think we're going to use? What do we care about with the formula? Maybe how many atoms are in the compound. So the prefixes that we're going to use are 1 is mono, 2 is di, which I think it's ironic that we're going to use di naming binary compounds. Anyways. 3 is tri. 4 is tetra. 5, what is 5, do you think? Penta. 6 is hexa. So these might be familiar. Pentagon, hexagon. What's 7? Hepta. Come on now. What's 8? We had the octet rule. You know what an octopus is. An octagon is a stop sign. 8 is octa. 9 is nona. And you won't use 10 very often, but you will use it sometimes. 10 is deca. So these are going to be very important as we go through this unit of naming things and making sure that we have them right. Alright, so let's do some examples, and we'll do a couple that you are probably already familiar with, and we'll do a couple that you might not be familiar with. So what's that? You know that one? I see somebody saying something. Well, let's go through our rules, okay? Binary molecular compounds always end in "ide," okay? We'll come back to that one to finish it, but the first element keeps its name, but gets a prefix if it has a subscript. So what's the first element in this example? Alright, let's label them. A C is carbon. What's the second element? What's an O stand for? Oxygen. Right? Okay, so the first element keeps its name, but gets a prefix if it has a subscript. Well, I don't have any subscript here, so I'm going to write carbon. And the second element gets the "ide" suffix and always gets a prefix. Alright, so I'm going to scoot over here and put, I know I'm going to keep ox, because the second part of this word is going to leave. So I'm going to have oxide. But it says always gets a prefix. So which one of these prefixes am I going to use for 2 atoms of oxygen? Di, right. So it's carbon dioxide. So we're kind of familiar with that. We've heard of that one. Alright, let's do another one. We're going to use the same elements, alright? So C is carbon. O is oxygen. Go back to our rules. The first element keeps its name, but gets a prefix if it has a subscript. Well, our first element does not have a subscript, so it's going to keep its name. Our second element always gets the "ide" and always gets a prefix. So how many atoms of oxygen do I have? Just 1. So which prefix am I going to use? Mono. So carbon monoxide. Now if you kind of remember those English rules, you're not going to have monoxide, because that 2 vowel thing doesn't fly. So carbon monoxide. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if this makes sense and you're like, yeah, okay. Okay. Alright, let's do a couple more examples just to get them a little more complicated. We'll go ahead and look at this one. What does the P stand for? Phosphorus. What does the S stand for? Look at your periodic table. Sulfur. Okay, so go back to my rules. The first element keeps its name, but gets a prefix if it has a subscript. Okay, well, I have a subscript here. So I have to give the first element a prefix. There's 2 of them. I'm going to use di. So I'm going to say diphosphorus. Now then, I got this sulfur business. What prefix am I going to use for this sulfur? Penta. So I'm going to come down to this line. Penta. Now I got to look at my word. Sulfur. So this part of sulfur, the last syllable, is going to leave. So I'm going to have penta sulfide. Because according to my rule, the second element gets the "ide" suffix and always gets a prefix. So diphosphorus pentasulfide. Alright, let's go the other way with this one, and then I'll let you have some time to do your practice. Let's try, here's the name. Try nitrogen hepta bromide. Oh goodness. What is our process? Well, first, I gotta find my element. So I have nitrogen and I have bromine, because I have to think, okay, bromide just sounds like an element. What would be on the end? Bromine. So I know that nitrogen is an N, bromine is a BR. Alright, so I can see that there are prefixes on them. What does tri mean? Okay. What does tri mean? Let me show me on your fingers, right. What does hepta mean? Yeah, use 2 hands for that one. It means 7. Okay, so if these prefixes are on the word, I know that they represent the subscripts that I would have. So go in the opposite direction, I have 3 nitrogen atoms, and I have 7 bromine atoms. So you could go either from the formula to the name, like we did earlier, or we could go from the name to the formula. Okay.